If you have these steel wheels with hubcaps, you want to start by removing the hubcap. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging, so use a pry bar or a screwdriver of some sort and pry these out. Just be gentle so you don't break them. With a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then take off the wheel. Next, I want to take off the axle nut. You'll need a 30mm 12-point socket for this, and preferably a deep socket because the axle does stick out quite a bit, and a shallow socket won't make it all the way on the nut. Now you want to make sure that your axle pushes through the hub. If it's seized, you can use a punch and a hammer and punch it in. This one's not seized, so that's perfect. Next, I want to take off this 12mm bolt here that secures the ABS wire and the brake hose onto the strut. Take both of those off. Next, with a 22mm socket, I'm going to remove this nut and hold the bolt side with a 22mm wrench. Do the same to the bottom one. Make sure these spin freely, and they do, that's perfect. Now you can remove these bolts. And as you pull the knuckle forward, make sure the axle pushes in. The reason you want to do that is so that you don't accidentally separate your inner CV joint. Okay, now make sure you're not putting a tug on either of these two. I'm actually going to unbolt this retaining bracket for the ABS wire off the fender well right here. That's going to give the ABS wire a little bit of extra slack. And now you can pull the axle out of the knuckle. Before you do this, make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch any fluid that might come out. Now I'm going to get myself a long pry bar. I'm going to put it right between the transmission casing and the inner CV joint and pry the axle out. There we go, that popped out. All right, that's completely out. At this point, you can take the CV shaft out of the transmission completely. I'm going to bring it up like that and then pull it out of the knuckle. Once it's out, you can guide it down this way. And here's your old driver's side CV axle. Now is a good time to inspect your axle seal. If it was leaking, this is a perfect time to replace it. Mine was fine, so I'm just going to put in the new axle and leave the old seal in place. Put in the new axle, I'm just going to reverse the uninstallation procedure. So I'm going to bring it in this way, slide it up in there, just so I can start it onto the knuckle. Once it's started into the wheel bearing, I'm going to compress this inner CV joint. Now you can line it up with the hole in the transmission, line up the splines in there and press it on. There we go, that pushed in. What I was doing is I was basically holding the knuckle and pushing it in like that. And before you fully install it, it's always useful to put some anti-seize on the splines. That way in the future, it doesn't get stuck into the hub. And now you can drive it through the hub. And now you want to bring your knuckle up into the strut. Get one of your bolts started. Usually the bottom one will line up first. And to get the top one in, just press in on the knuckle. I'm just going to set the ABS wire and brake hose in place. Go ahead and put your nut on to both bolts, of course. Snug them both up and then torque them to 159 foot-pounds. Reattach this ABS wire retainer here. And now resecure your ABS wire and brake hose onto this bracket. Snug that up. Resecure this one up here too if you took it off. Go ahead and put on your axle nut, bottom it out, and torque it to 217 foot-pounds. Put a pry bar going across, and it's actually hanging onto my lift. If you want, you can put the pry bar up against the ground, but whatever you do, you want to make sure that this is holding steady, so otherwise they'll just keep spinning as you try to torque it. Or what you can do is you wait until you put the wheel on, and then you go through the center of the wheel and torque it that way with the weight of the vehicle on the ground. Perfect. Go ahead and put the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Go ahead and torque these in a star pattern. And don't forget about your hubcap. You want to make sure that you line up the cutout on the hubcap with the valve stem. One last thing to do is to check your transmission fluid level. You want to check this with the car warmed up in park after it's gone through all the gears, and you want it running still when you check the transmission fluid. So pull out your dipstick, and you can actually check it with it cold because it gives you a cold line, but it's best to check it when it's hot after it's been through all the gears so that all the fluid is where it's supposed to be when it's at operating temperature. And you want to basically be in between these two lines here. And from here to here, it's going to be about a quart. As for what type of fluid, you can refer to your owner's manual, and at the end of the book, it'll tell you exactly what type of fluid to use.